I'm basically here, as I think we all are, asking this basic question of how can we do better at preserving what's already occurred, what's occurring now, and what will occur in the future. And what I'm going to do is go over a couple of challenges, opportunities, some guideposts, and then look at some of the new players coming on stage and some of the new opportunities and calls for potential action. And then I'm going to close by talking about semen. And those of you who are Lewis and Clark aficionados will know what I'm talking about, and everybody else will be as ignorant as I was until a couple of days ago. I think one challenge that we all face at multiple levels is the lack of resources to do what we would like to do. And part of that is conflicting calls on, in many cases, government tax dollars, but also part of it is enough people don't know what we do. And one of the reasons for, I'm going to talk about the desire for outreach, is the more people who know what we're doing, the better the chances are of getting support. But that's sort of a general given of the field. Never enough resources. Also, the area of space exploration, exploitation, as Art Dula talked about, as Michelle Hanlon talked about, increasing internationalization, increasing role of private companies in space. What that means is there are a lot more players, a lot more playing fields too, especially the moon. If you're taking a really long view perspective, asteroids, Mars, and so what we've known as space is hopefully expanding soon. These are new challenges for us, including the question of heritage. How do you preserve something? What do you do with it? Indeed, one of the questions of the space station that was raised is, do you deorbit it? If so, do you want to take anything out of it beforehand to put in museums everywhere, or do you just send the whole thing down, or do you put it into a higher orbit? If you do put it into the higher orbit, what do you do with it? What sort of access, if any, do you allow to people? Some really neat questions. There also, when we talk about new players, it's not just the participants, it's the analysts, it's the outsiders looking in too. There's a growing interest in space anthropology, space archaeology, and as we'll see, growing international interest in space heritage, including efforts to convince the World Heritage community that aerospace technology, space technology, is worthy of preservation. And as we'll see also, one of my favorite bugaboo words, outreach. A few months ago, the National Air and Space Museum and the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics held a one-day space symposium out at Uderhause, which was a really fascinating event. There was a little bit of overlap of a couple of the speakers here and there, but mostly very, very different audiences. And I apologize for the poor presentation of data, but as you would expect, about academic speakers made up about a quarter of the group. U.S. government representatives, another quarter. 4 were from NASA, 1 from the Department of State, talking about upcoming international challenges, another from Department of Defense. And as Ardula showed Tuesday night, Defense Department takes about 2/3 of the U.S. government budget, and part of the outreach for the future is is the defense effort being preserved? Is what the and even if it's being classified, particularly in the world of reconnaissance, is that history, is that heritage being preserved? Just throw out that question. You also had the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, the main aerospace engineering society, as a sponsor. And that's very important too, because it means that they're thinking about getting more involved in preserving their legacy, or the legacy of their members. By way of flagging bias, I am an AIAA member. I am a member of their history committee, and we are starting a pilot oral history program in the National Capital section this year, and maybe I'll be able to tell you more about it next year. But what was most interesting about this is that 1/3 of the speakers were either had businesses like Robert Perlman yesterday, and indeed he was one of the speakers, or they were from space. Enterprises, and they had deemed the idea of preserving their heritage significant enough that they had sent somebody there. And again, it may have just been raising the flag, trying to increase their public face, but the fact that they thought this important enough to come down was a very positive sign. And I did not do a similar analysis of the people up here speaking, but the little I did showed academics and government officials like National Park Service are very heavily represented, either that or contractors. Okay. By the way, it's astrobotics, not astrorobotics. The person who did the proofreading has been duly admonished. And the reason I'm putting this mission statement out is because if you look at what a lot of museums do, it's not just preserving the heritage, taking the stories, but in this case there's an explicit agenda of we want to excite the next generation. We want to ensure that there are people who say, young kids are going to leave that museum and say, I want to be a space engineer. And if you actually look at the mission statements of a number of industrial heritage museums, a lot of them have as a component get people excited about the past. So, what's interesting about astrobotics is that they are a space company, or one of these new enterprises. Didn't have that much luck with their first mission, which distinguishes them in no way from so many other governments and private firms. But they actually have a museum that they think this is important enough to be devoting resources to also. Now I'm going to switch to international actors. The first two of these, the United Nations and its Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space is one. UNESCO, another. Those are made up of governments. The next two, ICIMOS, the International Council on Monuments and Sites, and TICA, which I'm mispronouncing, the International Committee for the Conservation of Industrial Heritage, are private organizations. Well, they're nonprofits. They're organized, but they work closely with UNESCO in identifying, certifying international heritage sites, not just in industrial, but larger too for ICMOs. And last is NASA's Artemis Accords, and that's more of a statement of possibility because it's an intergovernment agreement, and Michelle Hanlon mentioned Section 9, that is in the Artemis Accords, is a section on preserving outer space heritage. And if the words are very positive, they're also very vague and very, very hopeful. But again, the fact that you've got this article, this section in the Accords that these other governments signed is a very hopeful sign for the future. That is, this gives advocates of heritage saying, or of preservation, a tool for saying, what are we doing to preserve, what are you doing to implement Section 9? What are we thinking about now? So this is a tool ripe for exploitation, which would mean working with NASA, working with the State Department to make this part of an active part of the Artemis Accords. Indeed, one area of possible future action is, hey, can we get NASA to sponsor a meeting with other Artemis members about possible ways of implementing or interpreting Section 9. I'm not sure how many of you are aware of World Space Week. It was created by a resolution of the United Nations in 1999, and it honors the week of it's every October 4th through 10th. October 4th because it's the first the launch of Sputnik, first human satellite into space, and October 10th. Hold on, we've got all these space enthusiasts, space heritage historians. No one can remember that on October 10th, 1967, the Outer Space Treaty was signed? Shame on you. You're as ignorant as I was a few days ago. But that's why you have that 1 week. Very nice thing. This is the theme for this year. It's the organizing committee is the World Space Week Association, and it claims that last year 83 countries did 16,000 events during this week, and its headquarters is about a mile away from here. So it's a bit of outreach by the UN. I'm not sure how successful it is. UNESCO's also been active. The piece on the Courier magazine is from 1996, talking about, wow, man in space. What a great international arena for this to happen. More importantly, for our purposes, apart from showing a long-running interest of UNESCO, efforts to utilize the World Heritage Convention, which does not apply to sites that are not owned by countries, so it doesn't apply to space, but how can we apply that to, in this case, it's the space efforts have gone under the efforts to look at astronomical and archaeoastronomical sites on Earth, but over time that's been expanded, and including were studies made by to look at these possible heritage sites I think the national parks, this is from 2010, and they basically, and the international organizers of this basically said, we're using the National Park Service criteria. So I want you to know, somebody's reading and using what you wrote. And they've been active. In 2017, there was a, let's not just talk about astronomical sites, let's talk about space technology, aerospace. And if you notice, there's one country that's not representative there. Actually, there are a number are not, but there's one big country that wasn't part of that. And I think one thing we have seen is that there are a lot of silos in the space heritage and preservation world, which is one of the good things about conferences like this and space heritage, a chance to go horizontally as well as vertically. But so there is growing international interest. Indeed, the recent UNESCO paper said, "Gosh, we really should think about celebrating or commemorating or recognizing sites in space." Part of there's some really neat challenges as part of that, including telling World Heritage Conference members that technological sites that are very recent, as Michelle Hamlin talked about, are worthy of preservation, of attention. Again, what's the legal structure? How can you recognize? How can you protect those sites? And if anybody has a spare $70,000, which, as a parent of a recent college graduate, I can tell you is about the price of 1 year of education at some American universities. So not that much, and there'll probably be parties too. You could sponsor this international workshop on space technological heritage. So there is, again, potential to work with the international community and figure out what we can do, how we can build on this. And that falls into, again, the questions of outreach, of how do we reach out to, and we should be reaching out more, listening to some of the talks we receive, especially the lectern, the recreation of the MCC. These, the seeds from space. These are projects that deserve a wider public attention and public history. These are fascinating stories, but we need to be reaching out more, both geographically, but within and across organizations and disciplines, different groups. I think one of the challenges for academics is working with, quote, quotation marks, amateurs, like collectors, who have a great deal of knowledge, but they haven't, but there are some interesting challenges for that. We need, as Molly talked about with her preservation, when we're collecting documents, if possible, and instruments, if possible, let's try to get oral histories to, if only to understand what the acronyms mean, but also to give context and things that were not written down. And something else we have to be doing also is thinking long term. That is, the effort to preserve mission control took several years from creating, from proposing it to actually getting the resources, the support to implement it. So we need to be thinking about phrases, what would we like to see accomplished, and let's make those connections now. Let's start those ideas, those discussions sooner rather than later. And one way of sparking interest is giving people a personal stake. Jeff Nunn, when he's talked to space executives, or if I remember correctly, one context was he talking to a course's International Space University. He got all these young executives, and he'd say, "Okay, raise your hand if you think your company is making history. You're making history." And the hands all go up. "Yeah, we're part of this." And then he'd say, "Okay, now raise your hand if your company is working to preserve that history." And then you see, the hands stay down, everybody's looking around, and it's a nice way of saying, let's get involved. And I hope what I've given you here is some ideas of there is a world out there that we should explore, and I'm not going to use the word exploit, but work with to better preserve, as some of the speakers here, the increasing heritage of all humanity. And I'm going to end with thanking the National Park Service for doing this. And by the way, we're talking about long-term planning. The impetus for the creation of the National Center for Preservation Technology and Training, which was founded in the early 90s, came from a 1986 Office of Technology assessment report on what is the United States government doing to preserve its heritage, its industrial, its architectural heritage. That report, by the way, was spawned by a request from the House of Representatives Interior Committee, or Interior Affairs Committee. I mentioned Seaman. That is the name of the Lewis and Clark dog, or the dog that accompanied Lewis and Clark on their great expedition west. And it's hard to tell, but that is a little stuffed replica of Seaman that was sent up to the International Space Station. It did not conduct original research, but it did let people show, look, Park Service, we're still out of this world. And since 2016, NASA has designated NASA astronauts as honorary rangers. This, by the way, is created by AI, by my friend Nick Ulanov, he said, "That was fun, what else can I do for you?" But just want to give a shout out. If you want to really be inspired by what the government is doing, go read one of the annual reports of the NCPTT. It's really, really impressive, as is what we are hoping to do here. And on that note, thank you.